Hello, this is Sandy Gertz for Every Day Can Be a Poem, and welcome to Poetry Rocks, using geology and reference materials in your poems or other writing. So this is going to be an interactive session where I'm going to show a lot by example some poems that I have that have explored what was underneath, what lies beneath the ground where I grew up. So if you like place-based poems and writing place-based material, then I think that you will enjoy this, or I hope that you will. And I'll just be sharing some of how I used my favorite reference material creatively and how you might do the same. So we're just waiting for our first attendees. Welcome to Lit Lunch. What did you bring for lunch? I did bring a snack because I haven't eaten lunch yet. Jovian Turtles, hey! Thanks for joining. So I'm getting used to this. I'm gonna give you a wave. I think I've at least learned how to do that. Hi, I'm glad you could join me. I was just giving a little overview, waiting for our first attendees to come on. So now that we've got something going, we can get rolling. So Jovian, do you want me to call you by a name or him or her or anything like that? If you feel like talking. If not, you guys can just kind of hang in and watch. But this is Welcome to Poetry Rocks, using geology and what lies beneath our favorite places to imbue our work with science and research. And I'm going to be giving you some examples of how I did that. Namely, I am doing it today in new work, but namely, I'm going back to my book, The Pattern Maker's Daughter, which explored with a lot of detail my place, which was Johnstown in Western Pennsylvania. And I was so moved and shaped. We're going to be talking a lot about shapes. Oh, great. Hi, thanks for joining. Yeah, welcome to the new people that have just come on. I'm Sandy Gertz for Every Day Can Be a Poem. And I'll try not to repeat myself for those of you who were here early on, but welcome to Poetry Rocks, digging a little deeper. And so I was just saying that I'm going to be using examples and then also try to give you examples of poems that I have used that incorporate science and geology and geography and landforms. And these are poems from The Pattern Maker's Daughter that I'm going to share. And I'm going to share with you my favorite reference book, A Geography of Pennsylvania, and how I used it to inspire me, not only for these poems, but long into the future. I still go back to this. Currently, I live in Nashville, and I'm exploring the geology and what the history, geography, geology are here in my new place. And I've actually been able to find a language for that which I was not quite able to express. Sort of the demise of another life in Pennsylvania and landing here. And so I was not able to find a voice for that until I went back to geology, geography, history of my new place now. And so in my new work, I'm kind of comparing the two. But for today, to get started, if you have any questions or you want to tell me what your place is that you would like to write about, just feel free to enter that into the chat, and I'll try to, look up and take note of that. But as I said, my place was in Western Pennsylvania, and I also said you could bring some materials if you have any reference or geology, geography materials. Mine that I'm using, and I also find a lot online, but this is called A Geography of Pennsylvania. Just one, like A Geography. And this is a book, straight up reference book, put out by Penn State. And the main editor is a long time, he has an endowed chair. He's deceased, but there's an endowed chair at Penn State in the geography department for E. Willard Miller, editor. And I really want to give him a thank you, a deep thank you, because I feel that this book, even though it's a reference book, is written very poetically and with the individual in mind. It's written, of course, scientifically, but it just seems to me to be a found poem in a lot of the passages. So the way I'll start off is, in this book, this incorporates geology, geography, religion, population, demographics, landforms, everything, and history, of course. So it starts off by talking about something that I think we might take for granted or maybe don't think a lot about, how what shapes us as an individual can be partly determined by what shapes our topography. This starts off with the overwhelming importance of geology and landforms. And I'm not going to read a lengthy reference thing, but just a couple things here. To understand the geography of Pennsylvania, or fill in your place, the place to begin is with a study of the state's landforms and the geologic circumstances that produce those landforms. So think about the history of place, but going much deeper. Geology and landforms directly affect a remarkable variety of physical conditions in Pennsylvania, or fill in the blank with your place. Welcome to the new people that have joined. In some instances, geology affects human environment immediately and directly. And I might have skipped this, which in turn have profoundly influenced the behavior and geography of Pennsylvanians. That's what I meant to say. So, how much do we think about that? How much do we think about how place shapes us? We usually think of the usual things like industry. I grew up in a steel town. We're talking about Western Pennsylvania, a small steel city. If you grow up by the beach, you're going to have a very different, if you grow up in California, you're going to have a very different upbringing. Weather is going to be easy. You're not shoveling out your driveway. You maybe have a more carefree lifestyle. So those are some of the things we think about. And of course, we think about the places that shaped us, like our backyard and our house and our favorite swimming holes. But how much do we dig deeper underneath that earth that you walked on or walk on or maybe still be walking on? How does that affect behaviors? So this has fascinated me for a long time. So sometimes landforms geology immediately affect people. Like, let's say you live in a steep terrain, a hill town in Italy. That affects where you walk and where you go. If you live in a place where you can walk easily or not, it affects your behaviors. Those are pretty obvious. But the chain of causation is clear and striking if one knows where to look. Okay, to begin with, events in geologic history determine the kind of rocks, because welcome to Poetry Rocks, the kind of rocks that underlie the Earth's surface, as well as the arrangement of these rocks. So, for those of you out there who know more about geology than I do, I thought it was really funny when someone reviewed my book and said I was a geology expert, which I had to laugh because I was terrible at science and anything like that in my studies. But because I wanted to learn so much because I was passionate about my place, I then learned and undertook a study of the rocks and things. But so the kind of rocks that underlie the Earth's surface, as well as the arrangement. So there's different arrangements and stream beds and different patterns of rock and different rock entirely. For example, Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Pennsylvania. As one might imagine, Western Pennsylvania doesn't have the metamorphic glittery rock. Eastern Pennsylvania has that. Also, right underneath Johnstown, such a unique place, very walled off. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the geography and topography, but very walled off Valley City. And it has some extremely unique patterns underlying specifically Johnstown. And I was specifically very inspired by my tiny little borough of 1200 called Dale Borough. And underneath that ground are some very unique stream bed patterns and rock formation and patterns. And they are different from the eastern part of the state. So that might be something that you want to explore, like find out, and if you brought reference materials today, or you want to be looking up some of this stuff, online while we're here, great. Okay, certain rocks contain a valuable mineral such as iron, coal, or limestone. Others are economically useless. Some rocks contain an abundance of groundwater and yield it up. Some rocks produce fertile agricultural soils and others are barren. So even that's poetic, Do you have barren soil underneath where you grew up, or is it very rich? So I think, like, for example, Dale Borough what used to be an orchard before it became proliferated with very dense housing put up for immigrants who came to work in the steel mills, of which my grandfather was one, came from Germany to work in the steel mills. And so it became dense and urban all of a sudden, but it still retained this amazing, just there'd be a sliver, it would be all concrete, and we had very little yards and postage stamp yards, but any sliver of grass or soil, just roses would proliferate. And so it had an orchard as its history. So maybe that's something to think about. What we're living in houses that are on land that was once something obviously much different. And so are you in the Midwest, a lot of fertile growing soil, or are you in a place that's very rocky and barren, which is poetic? So all that said, I want to start with this just to keep in mind. What shapes the earth shapes us. And one of the things that fascinated me so much was Johnstown is a very inhibited kind of town. Like, it's full of a lot of millmen, and even though the mills now are took a real hit and demise while I was growing up, it's a people and place with a lot of inhibitions, and I was not like that. I was creative and thought I could be an actress or write or do creative things or music, things like that, but that wasn't really the majority of people at all. And I started sort of having this theory about how walled off Johnstown literally was. So let's go to topography, geography. A lot of people know Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is parochial. We have our own language, Pittsburghese and all of that, and a lot of ethnicity. Every other block is, the Italian district or the Eastern European, and there's Byzantine churches and a lot of ethnicities. And each neighborhood would have its own distinct ethnicity. So is that the case where you live? But Johnstown, no highways meet there. So you go about roughly 2 hours, a little under 2 hours from Pittsburgh to Johnstown, and you must go through, just to get there, the Conemaugh Gap. And that is a geologic feature which is quite unique. It's a gap in a V, and it's where mountains, it's like the steepest gorge east of, I don't know why I say east of the Alleghenies, but it is this gorge, and it is a portal into Johnstown. So no highways meet. There's no reason you're going to go to Johnstown. You don't just stop off at a rest area there. Like, you have to purposefully want to go there. So this is why it's so provincial and parochial, and why the language was sustained. And if you, like, I lost that accent, but if you listen, sometimes I had 3 brothers and 2 of them left home, but if I listen to my oldest brother, like, sometimes I have to ask him twice what he said, because we have a way of not pronouncing vowels in the sort of normal way, and a lot of these things. So I was fascinated by that. So if you want to think about, what are the behaviors of the people in that place in which you live, and start to wonder, I wonder how I might, you might think, oh, that's stretching to think, well, there's aluminum or we have alum banks. Does that have anything to do with behaviors? It might seem like a stretch, but if you dig into it, I can almost guarantee you might be able to find correlations, at least in geography, for sure, and topography. Because topography can be easy or topography can be tough, in daily living. Okay, so bedrock geology is also a major determinant of stream patterns in Pennsylvania, or fill in the blank your place. Over the course of geologic time, many streams have an uncanny ability to locate themselves, I found this interesting, in zones of weak rock, while carefully avoiding more resistant rocks. And so you can find this out for yourself. So maybe you'll find a reference book like this online, or order one. And as we move along, thinking about what shapes us, you will be able to see these kind of topography maps. And you might be able to find, so the Appalachian Plateau, also that's another, I call where I grew up urban Appalachia, which might seem like an oxymoron, but literally it is. So we're very remote, and we are in Appalachia, but we're also very tightly packed together and dense and urban within the city. You go a little bit out of the city, ooh, it's a totally different story. Very, very background. So let's see. I want to move on to giving you an example of a poem, and I can't let you on live right now. I think somebody wanted, because I just can't quite maneuver that yet. But so, would you like to hear a poem? I'm going to share one of the ones, and in this book, The Pattern Maker's Daughter, that's where these are all from, I used a lot of epigraphs to talk about the rock and what I found. So we have a lot of shale. We have something called schist. And so I did a lot of study on that. And I think I'm going to read part of this earth for you and show you how I incorporated some of what I've learned into a poem. Part of this earth. I am rooted in this Appalachian bedrock, a sliver of the earth's volcanic events, ancient as Africa, shiny as new slag scraped from our hillside, high as the Rockies that walled us in, our lilting speech, our bent shoulders and inhibitions, as it stretched in infancy from Mexico to Newfoundland. Digging in childhood holes, I see roses grown from thin patches, seeds scattered over the cracked alley yards, school children picking at slim violets. Just under this surface, I am half Piedmont, half woman, half informed of my senses, traffic laws, library etiquette. My eons keep eroding. My origins are here, the part in my scalp, spaces between teeth, soft bones, in impressions on sedimentary rocks. They speak from layers within layers, seek the bottom of deep oceans, travel in shallow seas over the history of ancient beaches, river valleys where I'm polished and rubbed. I am shale, common and conglomerate, the dirty inside of a purse caked over lipstick, torn receipts and dried gum, skeletons of organisms drifting. I am rapidly moving streams, carbon-rich, organic, coal compressed. I am evolving, changing, volcanic, standing up straight, learning to walk across the room, raising my eyes from the floor. I form a thick sequence. I stack myself 8 miles high. I am a prize for geologists. Under great heat, violent under pressure, I am shale changed to slate into schist. Settling into dirt, I am shaking the hand of who I am becoming. I am sitting on top of a trembling earth. Okay, so thank you for your attention on that. That's called Part of This Earth. And so, I don't know, write in the chat if you like. Can you see what I was doing there? We got quite a few other people joining us. Thank you so much for joining. So I went ahead, and this was after study of what actually created the tectonic explosion that created Pennsylvania. So that I didn't talk about that just now, but that is where that poem came from. And maybe I'll read another. Okay, I'm going to read Dale Paleontology. So this one, this involves learning about the history of volcanic events, but also where your streams and rivers flow. So we have the Conemaugh River. Conemaugh Gap is the portal into our city, and we have the Conemaugh River. And a lot of people, when they think of Western Pennsylvania, they think of Pittsburgh and the three rivers, Monongahela and Conemaugh in Ohio. But we had the Conemaugh River, and one of the things that you could do for a prompt is find out where your streams and rivers eventually end up. So the Atlantic for mine. And you can incorporate that kind of history, geological history, geography, what have you. So this is called Dale Paleontology. And Dale is my little tiny borough, which was very colorful little German borough where I grew up with the good soil. On David Street, shirtless children dig in the sun. They tunnel through neighbors' tomato gardens, long grown over, where Mr. Henry used to kneel on his one good knee, telling me that no streams are navigable from here to the ancient Atlantic. Yet many of us have tumbled head first downstream when the Dale waters rose. A marker with 10 names chiseled into granite stands at the creek, next to shale imprinted with all the weary stories. Tammy, crumbling and conglomerate in misery, clerks the midnight shift at the Family Dollar, her platinum hair tied in ribbons on the girl, shoveling now to the bowels of the burrow. The boy, tan with dirt, is smiling the same toothy grin as Michael I knew from the alley. Everything is history, water springing like geysers, grass beneath my feet formed by a sequence of tectonic events. The day the last lot on the block transformed to a convenience store in metamorphic glitz. Its green silk blades transported to our skinny plot of brown by brothers who cast off their shirts in the August heat, carrying them on scarved heads, the memory of my father before backhoes breaking the ground, bending with his sharpened blades, dividing the earth into perfect small squares. All right, so that is Dale Paleontology, and I can't believe I'm talking about Johnstown, my hometown, and probably a lot of you are saying, oh, the only thing I know about Johnstown is the Johnstown floods. Woo, yeah, so, and I was in the 1977 flood, so there was the great horrible, horrific one in 1889, which is in our psyche, and which there is an entire section in The Pattern Maker's Daughter, my poetry collection, just devoted to the flood and the psyche of the floods and what that's done to us as a people there. Because after each flood, we had to rebuild. So the 1889 horrific, many, many lives lost. I think it might be, I'm going to be wrong, but it might be around 3,000. And then the 1936, which was not as devastating death-wise. And then 1977, which was a random flash flood. And so I experienced that, and it was crazy random. What happened was, and this has gone over in some poems, you might want to explore, your weather in your place. Is it a history of tornadoes, flooding, droughts, fires? Fires, too much on our mind now with California. Joan Didion. I use Joan Didion's essay quite a bit in my teaching at Cumberland University to show the Santa Ana winds that she writes about. Because usually when you hear about a fire in California, it's because of the Santa Ana winds. And that essay, if you haven't read that, in fact, that would be like one to do. Thank you all for joining. I'm seeing some more people. If you haven't read that, that is a great study in how weather and the psyche of our past events, weather, fires, history, whatever they may be, affect the people now. So yeah, Joan Didion, idol. So the flood figures quite prominently, yes, in this book. So, read a couple poems there. I'm going to go back to the Geography of Pennsylvania. And I think I have a photo of learning more about the physical landscape. I want to show you stream beds, but just how poetic some of this found material, reference material can be. You might want to start, so let's talk about prompts, but you might want to start with going ahead and taking that reference information and just doing a very simple scratch out or a very simple cut up of, if you can print out the language and do like cutting out and do a random rearranging. So that can be literally a found poem, and or you could just incorporate into your own poems a lot of the vocabulary. And I don't want to tell somebody to do this like willy-nilly, like just as a gimmick. I think that you need to be obviously very invested in your place to want to go to this level of research, and you want to be searching for perhaps clues to the people's behavior in your place or your behavior. And you can go ahead and do that. Take the random words, rearrange them, arrange them. That's one thing you can do. The second prompt you could do is you can research. If anybody's out there like looking on their Google right now as to what kind of predominance of rock or stream beds or rock formations are under your place, or maybe you know. I mean, some places are called alum banks, so you know there's a bunch of aluminum in there. Or minerals, or it's mineral rich. Are you a mineral rich? Let me say that, mineral rich place. So if you go ahead and look up maybe what kind of rock, so maybe you find, for example, I looked up just before this, I was looking up metamorphic rock, like just the technical definition. And metamorphic rocks arise from the transformation of existing rock types in a process called metamorphism, which means change in form. The original rock protolith, and you can get a lot of this great, expand the vocabulary of your poems, is subjected to heat, temperatures greater than 150 to 200 Celsius, and pressure. And then pressure is called metapascals. And that causes profound physical or chemical change. The protolith may be a sedimentary, igneous, or existing metamorphic rock. So just right there, just words, vocabulary, it gives you, some inspiring stuff to work with. Alum. So I was looking up about alum, and alum occurs naturally in various minerals. But alum is astringent and acidic. So it's acidic. So how could that relate to maybe perceptions of the place or the people of the place? It's colorless, odorless, and exists as a white crystalline powder. How does what is under the earth inform, affect? And we all know that industry and the history affects us. So we don't think that that's unusual, that our history can be in our psyche and affect us. So it's not that much more of a stretch to investigate, again, digging deeper what's under the ground. So back to a Geography of Pennsylvania, learning more about the physical landscape. We have seen the small number of internal and external processes that have worked together or in sequence or against each other to sculpt the complex pattern that is the landscape of Pennsylvania. Fill in the blank with your information or your place. The physical landscape must be seen as the first component of the varied modern environment of the state. It is first in several senses. It was the earliest to exist, of course. It is also first in the sense of being the foundation on which all other parts of the state's environment have come into existence. And it is the first requirement to which all users of the land, from earliest settler to the most recent homeowner, must adapt. I find that very, very thought-provoking, and I actually used this concept of what comes first, to help write a relationship poem, which I'm terrible at doing, and they always seem far too cliched, and I don't write. That's why I don't write a lot about love or relationships or my children at all. So as I was saying, just a personal aside, I spent, 24 years in another life in Pennsylvania. And when I landed, after I was picked up by the wind in Pennsylvania, I landed in Nashville in the South. And you all know how bound I was to my place up there. I lived a lot of places in the East, but I never thought I would leave really the Northeast. And so landing in the South, I needed to find a language. I needed to find a language to describe some of these things that had happened that I just couldn't find a language for. And so maybe, and I found that in my new work through comparing what happened, the demise of a marriage and demise of a life, with things that were found underneath the ground and through geography and history. And now, of course, using what I'm finding here in the South, which I'm finding very inspiring. I'm relating a lot of my exile here to the Mississippian era natives that proliferated around here along the Cumberland River. And that's in new work that I'm doing. But anyway, which that would be a subject of another lit lunch. But being first, and so I think I used the words, this is in new work again, so I don't have it today, but you are first, or I am first. You must start with the topography of my body. So you could use, there's a lot of sensuality in topography and landforms, as you might imagine. Oh, another great poet, talking about people that use this type of digging deeper place-based information, is Judith Vollmer. Judith Vollmer out of Pittsburgh is fantastic poet of many, many books. And she's a real Pittsburgher, so she would talk about, entering the city, through one of the rivers, and has a lot of sensuality and one might say sexual found sexual relationships and sensual relationship between the geography, the rivers, and the topography of Pittsburgh. So Judith Vollmer, and her earliest work is most evident of this. The Door to the Fire. The Door to the Fire. She has a lot of Steel City lore. Another thing that you can find and explore is there's a passage on what our ancestors found. What literally did the pioneers or the first settlers find where you're living? It's amazing what our ancestors found. I'm actually working on a new poem about this, but a virgin forest existed in the state when settlement began in the 17th century. Indeed, all the Piedmont agricultural land, the valleys of the Ridge and Valley region, and the highland pastures of the Appalachian Plateau had to be cleared of the forest. There was almost no flat, fertile, unforested land, and where it did occur was often not trusted by the early settlers, who bypassed even Indian clearing land, Native American land, to spend years of backbreaking work clearing their own. Then it goes on, much land cleared for earlier crops could later only be used for pasture, and it was abandoned and reverted to forest. Another interesting thing is there were marble mines. So there were marble mines very close to Johnstown, and I found this very revealing. Now, extensive clearings have again become forest, where deer and turkey hunters stumble across stone walls and segments of barbed wire miles from roads or neighbors. So even now, the today's hunters, and you go into the woods, you'll find the remnants of these types of other agricultural uses and industry uses with marble mines. So you might even be out in the woods and stumble over the remnants of a coal mine or a marble mine. I didn't grow up so much with coal mining in my history. That's more West Virginia, but there are definitely a lot of other parts of Pennsylvania that did have a very big coal mining history. My heritage and legacy of our family was steel. Everything steel. And the pattern maker's daughter is named for my father, who was a pattern maker in the mill. And about his ability to have to know the intricacies of math and algebra to make the molds for what steel would cast and harden in the mill. So it was like the highest trade in the mill. He had to work his way up through correspondence courses to do that, which also is the subject of another lit lunch. But moving on from that, so we have a way to identify the rocks. We have a way to find reference material and perhaps play around with that. Then you want to identify the crystals, the minerals, the rocks that are underneath your place and look for any intriguing correlations. Then to review, you can go to what the earliest industries were, what was found in your place by settlers. And I'm trying to find the stream beds. You're not going to be able to get a great look at them here, but I found another thing that I found to be exceedingly fascinating were the stream beds that were directly underneath. Yeah, here they are. And if you can get a map like that shows you the stream bed patterns of your state, then you can hone in and start to identify more closely your individual place and start to compare and just, I mean, get creative. You know, what do those shapes remind you of? What do they conjure up for you visually and mentally? And another exploration is the orogeny. I know what happens after the ancient tectonic events that formed your place. We have a period of the orogeny, after the orogeny. I found those all to be quite poetic, and I won't get into all of them here, but after the orogeny, it says Pennsylvania calms down. And so it's actually giving like a bit of hyperbole there. Since the Triassic period, Pennsylvania's geologic history has calmed down considerably. And then it says, no longer the active edge of colliding and separating continents, the gradual widening of the Atlantic Ocean left Pennsylvania in the stable interior of a huge tectonic plate. Through it all, there's so much good language in this. I'm skipping some of it for time, but there were new episodes of orogeny as great mountain chains were formed, volcanoes erupted, and lava poured out across the land. Who is writing this reference book? It's very evocative. Through it all, Pennsylvania remained relatively tranquil. I hope for you that you have some reference materials that's this good about your place. The time was not entirely uneventful, however, and 3 events are worthy of note. And then it goes into talking about, first, the sea lapped up over the southeastern margins of the state and left behind sediments that formed Pennsylvania's tiny piece of the Atlantic coastal plain. So there you can find out more about the sequence of tectonic events and eruptions and what formed. I think in Nashville, do I have any Southerners on here? So in Nashville, this is in my new work, so I didn't prepare today to talk about it, but I think Nashville was completely underwater. If anybody is a Nashville native here or from the South or nearby, you can go to Bicentennial Park, right in downtown. It's a national mall park where there's in marble is chiseled into the marble all of the history from ancient history and how we were formed, which is quite poetic. Oh my gosh, I have batches and reams of that kind of information now going in my new work. But you can find that out too. I don't know, maybe you have a state or national park like that has the history written out in some museum. This is an outdoor museum, Bicentennial Park. But so river patterns and stream beds. And then here you can see how marked up this is, where I was very inspired by the dendritic patterns of the trees and the stream beds and the trees that were formed. I'm going to leave this book for a second and read a couple more poems and see how we're doing with time. Great, okay. But this was a quote that I eventually used in an epigraph, having to do with the independence of large streams and rivers. For a long time, students of Appalachian drainage patterns have puzzled over why some of the main streams of the ridge and valley region depart now and then from the path of least resistance along bands of weak rocks and abruptly cut straight across belts of very resistant rocks, and thus slice through the ridges those resistant rocks have created. Whoa, okay, wrap your head around that. It's going to take, it took me a while to really like visualize in my mind how that passage played out. And so as I studied that more, I came up with a couple more poems that I used that epigraph in, and just relating the geography and what lies beneath us to my development and also the development of the town. So I think we're going to read these are short. I don't know if you have I have like about two more I could read, but this is Schist Anat, and I have to explain the title. It's N apostrophe at, and that is one of our that's one of our colloquialisms, our parochial language, which was not influenced by the outside world in any way. So the way you would use an at, maybe, I don't know if anybody knows an at or has heard somebody from Western Pennsylvania use it, go ahead and write in the chat. It would be something like, are you guys gonna go over there and at? Yes, we say that. In fact, this is the most Johnstown sentence I can say. You guys gonna go down there and at? And we go up at the end of our questions, of course. There's this lilting thing. Hence the name Schist Anat. This one explores it does explore the flood a little bit. The flood comes into play, and the minerals and rocks and other geographic and geological features of my tiny little borough. Schist Anat. On dale porches tonight, the faces are sagging shale. No smiles like in photos gracing the volumes of Ferndale yearbooks. They watch skeletons of small game drift in the tired creek, and no, they are not the metamorphic glitter of the east. Just ripples of the stream joining the little Conemaugh, rising for dances at the fire hall or a drink at Ernie's Tavern. Carbon rich, they puff menthols and build their volcanic ash. Old man Rick flicks cigarette stubs from the rocking glider, his contents compressed under pressure of the Iron City flip tab. Aluminum rings gather on the stoop, and coal-tinted kids string an endless necklace, breathing in smoky circles of air. Rick sheds layers with the dusk, dissolves into flaking schist and the stories of 1,000 loaded boxcars, how for 55 years he turned limestone into marble. He sits at the highest point in Dale as the hills cast golden spells of light, filtering the last of the day's sun. He chews on sunflower seeds and spits, watching the shells settle into the blazing dirt. That's Schist Anat. Wow, I'm so glad you guys hung with me. So I could either spend the last time reading my very last poem in The Pattern Maker's Daughter, which has a ton of geography and geology in it, or we could talk about these prompts. If you want to get interactive, I would talk more with you if I saw some things in the chat, if there's any kind of questions. Oh, clapping, that's so awesome. Yay. Oh, awesome. Hey, Nathaniel. Hamilton Matters. Hussein. Yay. I'm so glad you're all here. So it sounds like you want to hear this last poem, and then what we'll do is wrap it up with going over the prompts and maybe asking any questions that you might have to get going on this, or and you can also, DM me for individual prompts and things. Alrighty, this is a doozy. I began my book with just the Pattern Makers, and I ended it with the Pattern Maker's Daughter poem. And this is exploring the relationship between father and daughter, and also the topography geology. Now, there's one other thing you need to know, which was the subject of an earlier lit lunch. I grew up with seizures, a seizure disorder, and epilepsy, some may call it. I grew out of it at around 20, 21. But so if I make reference to neurological patterns, that's what this is about. And oh gosh, I forgot this poem that I have. Maybe I'll post it, about relating the different minerals and rocks of Pennsylvania to what I would see in my strobe light EEGs. So I don't know. You could vote on which one you want. But I guess since I started on this one, I will read this. The Pattern Maker's Daughter. It has this epigraph. Students of Appalachian geological patterns have long puzzled over why some of the main streams of the region depart now and then from the path of least resistance, which is probably what my father wondered about me. When you were born, Father, and now when you close your eyes to dream, it's the same patterns blinking and repeating inside you, steady as your infant first beats that tapped out a precise rhythm, predictable as the projects that came across your shop desk in the mill. Beneath my shuttered eyelids, I've told you what I see, the splits of our region's chaotic hills and streams, our city's glittering dust particles breaking from bedrock into the haphazard lines of my EEG, the ones you willed to be more measured as you sat amidst the bustle of neurology waiting rooms. We carry these innate flickerings, flashings developed in our interior worlds, mine pulsing like strobe patterns found in our ancient strata. Yours smooth as the flat rock at the bottom of the Little Conemaugh. Both of us shaped by the igneous outcroppings penetrating our soft shale. When my child was 1 day old, we slept chest to chest, and I dreamed I was him. It was all I could do to pry myself from that prism of color, shape, and constant beat. I woke jolted and eyes open to the poor beige of the room, the solid gray sheets. Your patterns are worn into the grids of streets which you walk each day, while I soar above the childhood alleys I see when making love. I hover over the roof of the vacuum repair shop, while underneath this city lie the old tectonic forces, anxious and dendritic, the random points I connect in poems that tie me to this earth. Today, when you sleep, you say you see the wood patterns created in the shops of Bethlehem steel, the racing algebra of exacting molds, etched numerals you branded into each piece with metal, and the countless 5 a.m. eggs in a cup Mother placed for you on the Formica table. For me, it's the intricate patterns of stream beds winding across the black milk of my tedious slumber, tiny looping lines that cross the topographic maps of Johnstown, like the inking of electrodes I produced on paper. They call to me from their brilliant beginnings, the Appalachian plateau I stretch in my dreams to meet, the orogeny of the Chestnut and Laurel Mountains, howling and breaking off as I twist and follow their endless, erratic passageways, beckoning and born from its ridges. Alrighty, so that's the Pattern Maker's Daughter, and I got to all the poems I was going to read but one. If you want to see it, it's the one about fissure flickerings, and it has a lot of the glittery rock and mineral kind of stuff in it, informed by that. I'm just so happy you're all here and hung with me, and I hope you've gotten something from this. Does anybody have any questions or any, like, do you want to shout out your place, or does anyone think that, oh, I don't see what I have. I have like hearts, I guess. Hello, okay. Does anyone think, they're going to use any of the prompts? So again, going back to actual just rock study, that in itself, what rocks symbolize and all of that is very, very rich. And then also the topography study, the study of what was originally in your place, and of course the ancient study of how your place was formed. All of that can be, and the stream bed patterns, of course. If you get to trying any of this and making any correlations between, the individual self or the people of your place, correlating to geology, geography, anything that we've talked about, history, weather history, I'm really fascinated by that one. Then, definitely write me. You can write me in my DMs on IG, or you can write me at sandygertz at gmail.com. And I hope, let me see if I have any questions. Okay, cool. All right, well, again, I'm Sandy Gertz for Every Day Can Be a Poem. Really glad you could join me for this lit lunch. The next one will be announced, but a bedtime story will be announced randomly, but my next lit lunch will be next Friday at noon, as always. And until then, happy writing and take care. Be inspired. See ya.